Alright guys, welcome back to the video. So after all that cleanup, we are now ready to go ahead with the glue up of the sled here, or at least the bottom of it anyway. So this really is not going to be that complicated of a glue up. We only have to glue these three pieces in between our two runners, and that will be about as easy as it possibly gets. And the nice thing here is that there's not really any complicated joinery. We do want to try and limit the amount of squeeze that we get, because obviously that's going to be a little bit harder to clean up with everything that we have going on here, but also it shouldn't be that big of a deal, because especially when we don't have all of our slats on there, they're not permanently mounted in place. It's very easy to go in and get all these areas that there may or may not be squeeze out. Now it's really important for this glue up, we're going to be using Type-On 3. You don't want to use either of the other Type-Ons because it's going to be in that outdoor application. It's going to be in the snow, which snow is made of slightly frozen water. It is going to be getting wet, and you want to make sure that you're using a waterproof glue in order to hold all this together. So you could either use Type-On 3, polyurethane glue. You want to make sure you're not using glues like Hide Glue or Type-On 1, glues that are not going to be waterproof. Okay, so we've got everything glued up, cleaned up. It's looking really good. I absolutely love how this thing's coming together. The last thing we need to add to the sled here is some runners to the bottom of the runners. So because I want this thing to actually be used outside, and overall this whole thing took a lot of work to make, I want to make sure that I'm protecting the wood from the natural things that it's going to end up hitting. With the wood runners, if you're just going through snow, that's fine. But knowing that my sister will probably use this around the city, where you're going to run across gravel or concrete trails, you might hit a lot of rocks and debris, that kind of stuff. I want to make sure that I have a tougher replaceable material on the runners themselves to actually protect the wood. So what we're going to be using is some 1/8 inch aluminum, and we're going to be painting it and all that to make it look a lot better. But we're basically just going to be putting this on with a few brass screws to hold it firmly in place, and that'll give us a much harder wearing replaceable surface. Now another option if you don't want to deal with metal is you could also just use a wood strip. You have to make sure that it's very straight, and when you bend it and all that, it's not going to break, that kind of thing. So if you just put a replaceable wood strip on the bottom, it's not going to last as long as aluminum, but it's going to be better than letting the actual sled itself get beat up. So one real important thing to mention about these holes is anytime you're joining metal to wood using screws, in the metal you want to make sure you're drilling clearance holes, and the wood you want to make sure you're drilling pilot holes. The big difference between them is in a clearance hole, the threads of the screw are not going to bite into the material. So in this case, because we're using brass wood screws to hold this stuff together, we want to make sure those brass threads are not trying to bite into the metal. So by drilling a clearance hole, which in this case for these number 8 screws is 11/64, that means that the threads of the screw are not going to be trying to bite into the metal, but the screw hole is going to be tight enough that there's not going to be a ton of slop around it. So you want to make sure that you're always choosing the right hole size. If you're ever questioning what size hole to drill for either your pilot holes, your clearance holes, or whatever holes you're trying to drill, always Google it. You will find countless numbers of sources that will tell you exactly what size pilot holes you need, what size holes you need for clearance holes. So just make sure you Google it at some point in time. Alright, so we're now on to the finishing portion of this. For this sled, I'm going to be using some Minwax Helmsman Spar Urethane. It's an indoor and outdoor finish. I've heard that this is supposed to be one of the best outdoor finishes there is, so that's why I chose to use it. Now you might be wondering why I'm not using tried and true oils like I normally use on all my furniture and every other project I've done, why I'm not using that oil on this project. And you totally could do it. Tried and true doesn't advertise themselves as an outdoor use finish because realistically it's not a long-term outdoor use finish, but you'd have to re-up that finish basically every year in order to make that thing last if you're actually going to be using it outside. So if I was making this sled for myself, I'd probably just use that tried and true oil and it would be no issue. But because I'm giving this to someone else, I want to make sure I'm going to give them a finish that is low maintenance, or in this case probably zero maintenance, other than me maybe refinishing it in 4 or 5 years. For the aluminum, we're going to be doing 2 parts to it. For the first part, we're using some of this self-etching primer. This is really good on anytime you're working with metal. What this does is it actually bites into the metal. There's obviously a lot of chemicals involved in it that make it so it etches into the metal, but this will make it so that your normal spray paint will hold a lot better to the metal. And because those aluminum pieces are going to be grinding on the ground and all that, we want to give it as much of a chance as possible to hold strong. So then we're going to be finishing it off with the red spray paint. So the whole reason we're doing this is just purely for looks. I know the aluminum is going to get beat up. I know that over time that aluminum is going to start to show, but I'd much rather start with it looking good. And that way, for the most part, the aluminum will be this nice red color that we're going to be painting it. And then you get to see those high wear areas or any kind of areas where it's rubbing a lot. And only on the bottom side of the sled is where you're going to have that exposed aluminum. This is also a gloss paint, so it should help slick up the bottom of it. Then when we wax it, this thing should glide through the snow, no problem. Now, one of the important things to mention here, I don't normally work with toxic finishes. This spar urethane is highly toxic, as you can see by the skull and crossbones on it. Spray paint is highly toxic, especially because I'm working in a fully closed up shop right now, because it's too cold to have the doors not open in order to have good ventilation here. I need to have the shop closed down. Once I'm done working and once I've got the finish applied, then I can open the doors, air out the shop for a couple minutes, and then close it all back down to contain the heat. But while I'm doing all this, I'm going to be wearing a respirator. Now, this is mainly an issue with the DIY crowd, on YouTube, Instagram, whatever. A lot of them confuse a respirator and a dust mask. This is a respirator. It's the exact same mask that you see me wearing when I'm standing in that, but the actual filters are extremely different. So these filters are going to block out all the toxic vapors coming from our spar urethane, as well as our spray paint. Those little round filters that you normally see me wearing on this mask, those are only for dust. Those will only prevent you from breathing in dust. So it's extremely, extremely important that you know the difference. Alright guys, so there is the completed sled with our now braided toe strap on it. So I didn't talk about this at all because I had no idea what I was doing. I just bought some paracord and decided that I was going to follow a WikiHow article on how to braid some rope. And overall, I think it came out pretty good. Now, I did make this quite a bit longer than I initially planned. Our total length from the front of the sled to the end of the rope is about 57 inches. I was aiming for about 4 feet, so it is quite a bit longer. But like I showed in that last clip, this actually might work out pretty good because you can put it around your waist and drag the sled behind you if you really want to. But even if you don't want to do that, it doesn't hurt having the rope a little bit longer because you can always twist it to just shorten it up and make it a little bit easier to pull or get it a little bit closer to you. So I decided to just leave this fairly long rope because I don't think it's going to be an issue in the long run, and I didn't want to have to go through and cut it and try and do all that stuff. The only thing I'm not a huge fan of at the moment is I had to use some white electrical tape on the front here because I don't have any black electrical tape in the shop, and I currently cannot start my truck in order to go get more black electrical tape. We're in pretty good Arctic temperatures right now here in Calgary, and my fairly old truck does not like to start in the winter, so that's just something that I'll have to wait for another day. And I'm also going to be giving this sled to my sister tomorrow, so I wanted to just get it done. But yeah, in the future I might replace that with some black electrical tape because I think that would look just a little bit classier. But overall, the sled looks and feels pretty awesome. Now, one thing I do want to mention here, the Minwax Helmsman Spar Urethane finish that I used on here, I absolutely hate that stuff. It scratches up super easily. Already with what I've done with this sled, there's already some small marks in that in the finish. It's an absolutely horrendous finish. Outside of this project, I don't know if I'll ever use that finish again. Like I said, it's horrible. It stinks. It fills the shop with all kinds of chemicals. This thing has taken almost a week to fully air out, and it still has an odor to it. So overall, I'm not a fan of that Spar Urethane, but it'll work for this project, and it doesn't look all that horrible. Again, this thing is going to get beat up, scratched up anyway, so it's really not that big of a deal. But anyways, guys, that's gonna do it for this project, and as always, I do hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one.